Hello guys, it is a snowy winter day, so we are going to stay inside today, and I'm going to be making a new sandwich loaf recipe that I just found out about a couple weeks ago, and it made the most perfect sandwich loaf ever. Even my partner said it reminded him of just like grocery store sandwich bread. So if you have picky kids or just are looking for an alternative to store-bought sandwich bread, this is going to be the recipe for you. So this recipe is from Feast and Farm here on YouTube. I'll drop a link to her video with the original recipe below. But yeah, we are going to get in the kitchen and start making some bread. So to start our sandwich loaf, we are going to add a cup of warm water to your mixing bowl. And then we're going to add 1.5 teaspoons of our dry active yeast. So there's 1.5. And then we're just gonna take a fork and mix this together so that we can hydrate that yeast. And then we're actually gonna let this sit for about 5 to 10 minutes and just let that yeast activate. So I'm gonna set this aside. We are going to start a timer and come back. All right, so it's been about 6-7 minutes, and as you can see, all of the kind of bubbly stuff floating on the top, that's the activated yeast. So that's what you're looking for to make sure that your yeast is active and is gonna actually help your bread rise. So next we are going to add the sugar, oil, and egg. So we're going to do 3 tablespoons of white sugar. We are going to do 2 tablespoons of oil. I'm using avocado oil. You can get it at Costco just because it's more of a flavorless oil instead of olive oil, but you could use any vegetable oil instead of avocado. So 2 tablespoons of that. And then we are going to do 1 egg, and this is a store-bought egg because my chickens don't lay eggs apparently. Oh no, I dropped a shell. That's okay. Once again, we are not professionals on this channel. All right, and now that we have all those ingredients in, we're just going to blend them all together, just roughly with a fork. Just like that. And now we're going to grab our flour and our salt. So we are going to add in 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, and I just measure that roughly. And then 3.5 cups of flour. And if this is your first time doing this recipe, you can always just do 3 cups and then hold off on the 1/2 cup until you are sure that you actually need it. But last time I did for sure need the 1/2 cup, so I'm just gonna go ahead and put all of it in. And now we are just going to mix until we get a scruffy looking ball of dough. And when it gets too tough to mix with the fork, just get in there with your hands. And at this stage, you're not so much worried about kneading the dough together as much as just getting all of it to combine fairly evenly. All right, that is looking pretty good here. So next we're going to put some oil on top of this and let it sit covered with plastic wrap. But before we do that, I am going to turn on my oven to about 300 and just let it heat up. My house is quite chilly and I find the bread dough doesn't rise very nicely unless there's a little bit of warmth underneath it. So you could use like a seed starting heat mat to do this as well, but I just turn on the oven for a little bit while I'm finishing up this process, and then I let it sit on top of the stovetop because it gets a little bit warmer that way, and it just helps speed up the rising process. So instead of it taking like an hour and 45 minutes, it'll only take an hour. So we're just gonna take a little bit more of our oil and just kind of lightly put a little bit on top, and then just kind of pat it around so that we get the top evenly covered. And this is just so that if your dough rises up to the cling wrap, that it won't actually stick to it and you won't lose the structure in your dough. All right, so now that we have that all covered, quick flip, we can saran wrap this. Just like that. And then we are going to let this rise until the dough is doubled in size. So that should be kind of right up to almost touching the cling wrap, but just below it. So I have my oven turned on. This part up top is going to get warm, and that will help with the bread dough rising. So I'm just gonna set a timer, let this heat up for 10 minutes. And then we are gonna come back and just shut the oven off and let this finish rising. All right, so it's already been an hour, and as you can see, the dough has definitely been rising, but it's not quite up to the top yet. And so it can be very tempting to go ahead and start making your bread because it's risen quite a bit, but just not quite that full amount. But that is where you don't want to let impatientness get to you like I normally would, and you want to wait until it's fully risen for this step. So this step, if it takes longer, that's okay. I'm guessing I'm probably going to be closer to an hour and a half on a rise for this. Most recipes say an hour, but my house the kitchen tends to be the coldest spot because we have our main door here, and so I'm just going to keep being patient and let this continue to rise until it's gotten probably like halfway between where the dough is now and the top of the bowl. So this is going to sit for another 15-30 minutes before we move on to the next stage. All right, so now this is where the bread dough has risen enough that we can start to actually work with it. It hasn't quite come up all the way on the sides, but it's actually domed and it's made contact once already with the cling wrap. So now we move on to kneading the dough and getting it ready to shape for the loaf pan. So to knead the dough, you're going to want to coat your surface in just a little bit of flour. You don't want to knead a whole bunch more flour into the dough, otherwise you'll get a really heavy bread and it will be kind of like the light squishy texture that you're looking for. And then you're just going to gently pull the bread out of the bowl. Try to keep as much of those fibers intact as you can. Right like that. So now we're just going to coat it in flour, and this is where the kneading comes in. And so to knead it, we're going to fold it over, push through on the palms, And you can spin it and just keep pushing through. And I find the kind of rolling along with your palm is what really makes the most effective knead. And so what's going to start happening is the dough is going to start coming together, and it's already, you can see, starting to get this really smooth texture. So we're going to keep doing that, and then as you knead it and the flour gets worked in, it will get a little bit sticky again, and you can just add in a little bit more flour. But what we're looking for is for the dough to pass the window pane test. And I've read about the window pane test lots, and I understood in theory what it was supposed to do, but kind of like in most recipes where someone says knead the bread, a lot of the times you don't really get a visual on what kneading the bread actually is supposed to look like. I'm a very visual person, and so that is why this recipe that I found has worked so well, because there was a YouTube video that had really good visuals of what you're looking like. So right now here, we've got a really smooth dough, and it's starting to stick a little bit to the counter, so we're just going to put in just a little bit more flour just to keep it from sticking completely. Anyways, and so I'm a visual learner, so I kind of struggle sometimes with just reading a recipe and not necessarily knowing what something is supposed to look like when it's been done properly. But that's why I really liked this recipe, because it was pretty straightforward, and also the YouTube video on the Feast and Farm channel did a really good explanation as well. And so what the window pane test is when you stretch the dough apart, you should be able to see light without it breaking. So this just broke through, which means that it's not ready yet. So we need to keep kneading until we're able to stretch it without it tearing. And this does take time. It's like a good 5-10 minutes of kneading, and just as it's getting stickier, you just have to keep adding in just a little bit of flour at a time. I just had to run and grab a phone charger because my phone was about to die. So I've just been continuing to knead this for a couple minutes now. And so you can see now when we stretch it apart, it's got a little bit of stretch. It's starting to thin out, but it's still tearing. So we're just gonna keep on kneading it. And you shouldn't need much more than like a half a cup or quarter cup of flour to finish this process. But if you do need a little bit more, that's okay. Just try to use the smallest amount possible each time. And you don't have to like really like press super hard into it, but I do find giving a bit of pressure and that kind of rolling motion with the heel of your hand really helps the process along. And so once again, it's starting to get a little sticky. And the whole goal of the window pane test is that you've worked the structure of the dough until it's nice and softened and kind of has that like stretchiness to it. You've broken down everything, and all the gluten's broken down, or not all of it, but the structure of the bread dough is nice and soft, and that's what's going to get you your really light, kind of airy, squishy sandwich bread. If you don't knead it enough, that's when your loaf will be dense and it won't have the same texture that you're looking for. So this is starting to look like it's getting close because as I'm folding it over, it's not tearing as much on the backside as you kind of push the dough through it. So we're getting somewhere. And also the closer it gets to being ready, the longer it can go without actually needing more flour. It kind of loses its stickiness. And it also just kind of starts to feel softer in your hand, or like a little squishier. So let's try this now. As you can see, it stretches out, but it's maintaining. And what you're looking for is if you can hold it up to the light and see the light spots here and here. So that is what you're looking for on a window pane test. I'm gonna grab the camera and show you that on a better angle so you can see what I'm talking about a little better. Alright, so this is what we're talking about with the window pane test. Just as you're stretching the dough out, it's forming these panels that you can see the light through but are not actually ripping. And so that is what's going to signal that our dough is ready to go. If you're on the fence about it, always need another minute longer. But this is looking good. It's not even needing flour anymore to stick. And it feels kind of soft to the touch, honestly. And so now what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna want to make the dough into a rectangle. So for that, I'm just gonna put a little bit more flour down just to help it. But you'll find if you go to kind of stretch the dough out that it snaps back. So even if you squish it down, it's gonna tighten back up to its kind of original ball form. So that means we need to let the dough rest. So I'm gonna set a timer for 5 minutes and then come check on it. And if it's still shrinking back, even just when I go like that, you can see it's shrinking back. Then I'm gonna give it another 5 minutes, but within 10 minutes, it should be rested and you should be able to kind of shape it out and it should stay where you're pulling it instead of shrinking back in. So now it gets to rest. All right, so at this point you can preheat your oven to 400 degrees. And now we are going to make our dough into a rectangle just by kind of stretching it out. And you want the widest part here to be about the width of your loaf pan. All right, that there looks about good. And now you're going to roll the dough up, and you want to roll it fairly tightly so you don't have any big air pockets. Just like that. And you can kind of tuck the ends in. And then into your bread pan, you're just going to put a little bit of oil. And then just make sure that it's fully coated. Like that. Now we're going to put our dough into the bread pan. And now we're gonna let this rise until it is about an inch above the top of the pan. You want it to just start to kind of come over the top, but not get too high, otherwise your bread can collapse. So I'm gonna set this on top of the stove because since the stove is preheating, it's gonna be a little bit warmer there and it's gonna help speed this process up. But it should be about 20-30 minutes for this to continue rising. So we are gonna leave that there until it gets about that tall. So this is what the bread is looking like after 15 minutes. And I think I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the oven because I'd rather it be a little bit short than too tall. And bake for 25 minutes. Our timer just went off, and now it is time to see the finished bread. Ooh, I'm gonna grab oven mitts and get that out. So as you can see, this bread really rises, and rolling it gives it a little bit of that shape. We are gonna get this onto a cooling rack and let it cool overnight. If you want, you can brush butter on the top of this just to make it a little bit of a softer crust too. So there is our finished sandwich loaf, and you're gonna wanna let it cool completely before you cut into it, otherwise it can lose some of the structure. But other than that, that is it. So it is definitely not hard to do. This is a really good recipe. It's kind of foolproof for me. Once I got the hang of knowing how long to knead it for, it really hasn't failed. And this looks great. So I'm going to put in a clip tomorrow when we cut it. Because if you guys haven't guessed by the change in light conditions, it's now 7:30 and completely dark outside. So I will see you guys tomorrow morning for the rest of this video. All right, it is the next morning and it's time to cut our sandwich loaf. So we're gonna use a serrated knife. There you have it. Nice, fluffy, squishy, textured bread. So that's everything for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. We're gonna make some breakfast here this morning. But if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. I do put out videos every single week, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.